On the quiet morning of October 2nd, 2020, an event unfolded that would leave a lasting scar on everyone who witnessed it. At least 10 individuals saw it happen as it played out in real time. A few managed to fumble for their phones, hands trembling, voices cracking as they tried to explain the unfolding horror to emergency dispatchers. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the attacker turned and sprinted back to a waiting SUV. With a roar of the engine and a squeal of tires, the vehicle sped out of the parking lot, vanishing from sight before anyone could even think about giving chase. Law enforcement officers and paramedics arrived on the scene within minutes of the first calls. But tragically, it was too late. The shock of what had occurred reverberated through the community. Even seasoned detectives and forensic specialists admitted they were rattled. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Alyssa Avery Burkett came into the world on August 18, 1996, in the peaceful and family-oriented suburb of Carrollton, Texas. Situated in the northeastern region of the Lone Star State and falling within the Dallas metropolitan area, Carrollton had long enjoyed a reputation as one of the most desirable places to raise a family in the United States. Known for its excellent schools, low crime rate, and close-knit community, it offered a wholesome backdrop to Alyssa's early years. She was the younger of 2 daughters born to a hard-working middle-class couple who valued family above all else. She was the type of person who sought meaning through experience, introspection, and personal growth. Her family loved her deeply, and though they didn't always understand her artistic inclinations or her spontaneous decision-making, they supported her the best they could. Alyssa was not particularly drawn to academics, and her school records reflected that. She struggled through high school, and though she did eventually graduate, her attempts to pursue higher education were met with rejection and setbacks. Undeterred by these obstacles, Alyssa attempted college again and again, hoping to find her place in a world that often seemed to favor conformity over creativity. However, during her final year, overwhelmed by academic pressures and uncertain about her path, she ultimately decided to withdraw. With bills piling up and no financial safety net to rely on, she took a job as a waitress at a bustling local bar, a decision that marked the beginning of a dramatic new chapter in her life. It was during this phase of transition and self-discovery that Alyssa crossed paths with a man named Andrew Beard. Their meeting was entirely unplanned, occurring one summer evening in 2017 when Andrew stopped by the bar where Alyssa worked. Nearly 10 years her senior, Andrew was an imposing figure, charismatic, self-assured, and clearly affluent. He was the owner of a flourishing power tools company, which had expanded its reach across multiple states. Andrew was instantly captivated by Alyssa's beauty, charm, and uniqueness. Unlike the corporate executives and polished professionals he was used to encountering, Alyssa was refreshingly authentic. He initiated the first conversation, making her laugh with witty remarks and engaging her in thoughtful dialogue. She was flattered by the attention and curious about the confident man who seemed to have everything. Their first date followed quickly, and within weeks, their relationship took off. Alyssa soon found herself swept into a world she had only seen in movies. Fine dining, luxury gifts, spontaneous weekend getaways. Andrew would arrive at the bar in one of his sports cars, waiting to pick her up like a scene out of a romantic novel. At first, Alyssa genuinely believed she had found her fairy tale. The relationship seemed ideal on the surface. Andrew was generous, attentive, and made grand romantic gestures that made her feel special and cherished. Friends and even family members expressed admiration, believing Alyssa had met someone who could give her a stable, comfortable life. But fairy tales, as Alyssa would come to learn, often contain dark turns. As the initial magic began to fade, cracks in the relationship became increasingly evident. What had started as harmless teasing soon escalated into cutting remarks that seemed designed to undermine her confidence. Alongside these criticisms, Andrew's behavior shifted in other ways. Eventually, she made the courageous decision to end things. She was ready to walk away, focus on rebuilding her self-esteem, and start over, until life threw her an unexpected twist. Shortly after the breakup, Alyssa discovered she was pregnant. Her roommate and best friend, Anne, vividly remembered the moment. Alyssa emerged from the bathroom in stunned silence, holding up a positive pregnancy test, her eyes filled with both shocks. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't even fully processed the end of her relationship with Andrew, and now everything was about to change again. To Alyssa's surprise, Andrew responded to the news with apparent calm and even excitement. He expressed a desire to be involved and offered to support her and the baby. Hopeful that he had changed, Alyssa allowed him back into her life. She returned to college, enrolling in evening classes with the dream of completing her degree and building a future for herself and her child. For a brief period, things seemed better. Andrew was attentive, helped furnish the nursery, and seemed genuinely invested in becoming a father. But this fragile peace didn't last. Within 4 months, old behaviors resurfaced. Andrew's temperament grew unpredictable again, and the atmosphere in the home became increasingly tense. At 7 months pregnant, she made the difficult decision to move back in with her parents. Surrounded by love and support, she finally began to take steps towards securing legal protection for herself and her baby. Determined not to be tied to an unhealthy relationship, Alyssa met with attorneys and began exploring options for sole custody. Her legal team advised her on the challenges ahead, especially considering Andrew's financial advantages and willingness to fight. He saw Alyssa's actions as a betrayal and accused her of being unfit to raise a child. He claimed she lacked discipline, financial stability, and vision, qualities he believed essential for parenthood. On July 23, 2019, under the warm Texas sun, Alyssa Burkett welcomed her daughter into the world. She named her Willow, a name that symbolized both grace and resilience, qualities Alyssa hoped her child would carry throughout life. It was a turning point in every imaginable way. She was now responsible for another human being, one she intended to protect, nurture, and love with every fiber of her being. By the time Willow arrived, Alyssa had accomplished something she once believed was out of reach. She had completed her college degree. Despite the countless challenges, sleepless nights, and a pregnancy that required her to push beyond her physical and emotional limits, she had crossed the finish line. Her perseverance paid off when she secured a job shortly afterward as an executive assistant at a real estate firm. It wasn't glamorous, but the salary was decent, and more importantly, it was enough to support her daughter and begin building a future. Her parents, always her anchors, stepped in to help with Willow. They were more than just babysitters. They were involved grandparents who gave their all to ensure Alyssa could pursue her career without compromising her daughter's care. The early months of motherhood were challenging, but filled with warmth and support from family. Still, a shadow loomed over these precious moments: her ongoing legal battles with Andrew Beard. Andrew, Willow's father, remained relentless in his mission to gain full custody. He painted Alyssa in court as irresponsible and inadequate, despite the many strides she had made. He claimed he could offer a more stable and comfortable life, pointing to his wealth, his multiple business ventures, and his extensive property holdings. Alyssa, on the other hand, represented to him everything he looked down upon: independence he couldn't control and a past he couldn't erase. The courtroom became their battlefield. Andrew used every legal maneuver available, frequently dragging Alyssa to hearings, forcing her to allocate a large portion of her modest salary to legal fees. She often wondered if his motive wasn't rooted in genuine concern for Willow, but rather in a desire to punish her for leaving him. Alyssa made several efforts to find a peaceful solution. She proposed shared custody, suggested co-parenting counseling, and tried to maintain a respectful line of communication. But Andrew refused to compromise. Eventually, a judge established a formal visitation arrangement, granting Andrew weekends with Willow. But even with a court order in place, Andrew wasn't consistent. Sometimes he picked Willow up on time, other times not at all. His moods were unpredictable. When Willow turned 6 months old, things briefly improved. The back-and-forth arguments paused, and for a short while, their interactions were less tense. Andrew even allowed his parents to become involved with their granddaughter. They adored Willow. often doting on her and sending Alyssa thoughtful messages of appreciation. Alyssa dared to believe that a peaceful rhythm had finally been achieved. That illusion shattered in the spring of 2020. In March of that year, Andrew began seeing a woman named Holly Elkins. She was several years older than Alyssa and presented herself as approachable, nurturing, and open to building a positive dynamic for Willow's sake. At first, Holly seemed to have a calming influence on Andrew. For roughly 3 months, both parents abided by the custody arrangement. Pickups and drop-offs went smoothly. There were no courtroom summons or angry voicemails. In mid-April, Holly even reached out to Alyssa via text message, expressing her hope that they could maintain a respectful and supportive relationship for Willow's benefit. The message was warm, even encouraging. Though the two women hadn't spoken much, Alyssa appreciated the gesture and responded in kind. But that sense of balance didn't last long. On May 24th, Andrew was supposed to return Willow after a weekend visit. When the agreed-upon time passed without any word, Alyssa became concerned. After a short delay, Andrew eventually responded, and a minor argument followed. Alyssa, not wanting to create unnecessary drama, decided to let the matter go, believing it was just a misunderstanding. But Andrew, already irritated, responded with harsh words and renewed his demands for full custody. He accused Alyssa of alienating him from his daughter, insisting that weekend visits were no longer acceptable. The calm co-parenting she thought they had achieved disintegrated almost overnight. Andrew, without warning, filed yet another custody suit, pushing once again for sole parental rights. He seemed more determined than ever to exclude Alyssa from Willow's life altogether. But what came next wasn't just another legal twist. It was far more alarming. By early June 2020, Alyssa began to feel like her life was being quietly monitored. It started with small, unnerving observations. She would sense that she was being followed while driving. Cars parked near her apartment lingered longer than seemed normal. At stores or restaurants, she'd catch sight of the same unfamiliar faces. It might have been paranoia, she told herself, but that rationalization didn't hold for long. More disturbing signs followed. Andrew began referencing details of private conversations she had only had with her attorney. He showed up at places she hadn't mentioned visiting. Once, she arrived at her car in a public lot and noticed that the contents inside had been shifted around. Her glove compartment was open, papers scattered, and a child's toy missing from the back seat. Though nothing was stolen, it was clear someone had been inside. Alyssa started double-checking locks, changing passwords, and keeping a detailed journal of every unusual event. She reached out to her attorney, and they discussed filing for additional protective measures. Still, she tried to keep things as normal as possible for Willow, even as the stress took a toll on her sleep, her concentration, and her sense of safety. Then, in early September, a disturbing event shattered what little sense of security she had left. A man named Frank Marrow, someone Alyssa didn't know personally, contacted local law enforcement with a claim. He alleged that Alyssa was involved in distributing illegal products from her vehicle. The accusation was shocking and completely unfounded. When police officers showed up at Alyssa's workplace and asked to accompany her to her vehicle, she cooperated, visibly shaken but compliant. She unlocked the trunk, having no idea what to expect. What she saw nearly made her knees buckle. Inside were neatly stacked bundles of cash, far more than Alyssa had ever seen in her life. She stared in disbelief. The officers began their protocol, reading her rights and escorting her to the station for questioning. Alyssa's heart pounded as she tried to explain she had never seen that money before, that she had no knowledge of how it ended up in her car. The interrogation was intense, though civil. Alyssa repeated over and over that she was innocent. She had no criminal history, no prior offenses, nothing to suggest she was capable of what she was being accused of. The entire situation felt surreal. She began to wonder if someone had planted the money to frame her. Upon thorough investigation by authorities, it was determined that there were no fingerprints, No DNA evidence, and no forensic trace tying Alyssa to the large sum of money discovered in the trunk of her car. Not a single shred of biological or physical evidence linked her to the alleged crime, strongly suggesting that the items had been intentionally planted in a calculated attempt to frame her. After hours of questioning and meticulous examination of the scene, law enforcement had no choice but to release her due to insufficient evidence. However, while Alyssa was cleared in the eyes of the law, her personal life and sense of safety had been permanently altered. She felt certain that someone was tracking her movements, listening to her conversations, and monitoring her from the shadows. Although she took steps to secure her digital life, running anti-spyware scans on her phone and computer, resetting passwords, even having her devices checked by professionals, nothing turned up. There was no trace of spyware or any breach. Yet, her unease only grew stronger. For the next 4 months, Alyssa lived under a constant veil of fear. She was alert to every car that followed too closely, every stranger who lingered a little too long nearby. Her once peaceful life had turned into a hyper-vigilant existence where trust was scarce and safety felt like a luxury. Then came the morning of October 2nd, 2020. It was a Friday. The sky was clear, the air crisp with early signs of fall. As usual, Alyssa arrived at the office complex where she worked. She parked her car in her designated spot in the lot, just a few feet away from the building's main entrance. Everything seemed routine until it wasn't. She was gathering her things, preparing to exit the vehicle, when she noticed a large black SUV, a Ford Expedition, parked just a few spaces away. The windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to see inside. The vehicle looked unfamiliar, but Alyssa didn't initially think much of it. Her job was in a busy area. Cars came and went all day. But just moments later, her instinct told her something was off. A figure stepped out from the SUV. The man, described by later witnesses, had a beard and was wearing all black. His clothing was deliberately nondescript, with a hood pulled up to shield his identity. The way he moved, calm, purposeful, and without hesitation, sent a chill down the spines of those who observed from a distance. Without saying a word, he walked directly to the front of Alyssa's car. What happened next was swift. At least 10 people, including office workers looking out from nearby windows, witnessed the scene unfold in real time. Shocked and immobilized by fear, none of them could act fast enough to intervene. Several scrambled to dial emergency services, their hands shaking as they described what was happening. The entire event lasted only a matter of minutes before the assailant turned and rushed back to the SUV. The vehicle peeled out of the lot at high speed, disappearing before anyone could react. Law enforcement officers and paramedics arrived on the scene within minutes of the first calls. But tragically, it was too late. The shock of what had occurred reverberated through the community. Even seasoned detectives and forensic specialists admitted they were rattled. Many said it was one of the most unsettling crime scenes they had ever encountered. The nature of the assault, its timing, location, and precision, left no doubt that it had been carefully premeditated. There was no indication that the perpetrator intended to rob or frighten her. The actions had been focused and deliberate. It was clear to investigators that the motive behind the crime was deeply personal. Within moments of the emergency response, Alyssa's family arrived at the scene. Her co-workers, in their panic, had called her parents immediately after the attack. The image of Alyssa's mother collapsing to the ground at the sight of the flashing lights and police tape would stay etched in the memories of those present that day. Her family was devastated. When detectives asked if there was anyone who could have had a motive to harm Alyssa, her parents didn't pause. Without hesitation, they named the one person they believed capable of orchestrating such an act: her ex-partner and the father of her child, Andrew Beard. They also revealed that the day before the incident, Andrew and his partner, Holly Elkins, had taken Willow for a scheduled visit. The timing now seemed far too convenient. Fearing that Andrew might try to flee the area, authorities issued an urgent statewide alert. Patrol units, air surveillance, and border checks were alerted to be on the lookout for Andrew's vehicle. Within hours, law enforcement located Andrew, Holly, and Willow traveling in a car along a route heading toward Andrew's residence. The couple did not resist when pulled over. They appeared cooperative and composed, answering every question presented by the officers. According to those involved in the initial questioning, both Andrew and Holly showed no signs of panic or distress. They expressed genuine surprise about the tragic news and willingly agreed to accompany police to the station for further questioning. A preliminary search of Andrew's vehicle turned up nothing out of the ordinary. No weapon, no traces of evidence, no clothing matching the suspect description. Despite mounting pressure and outrage from Alyssa's family, authorities had no grounds for detention. Andrew hadn't violated any legal agreement regarding custody or court orders, so he was released. However, the case was far from over. Later that day, a search warrant was issued for Andrew's home. Detectives, forensic analysts, and crime scene technicians arrived at the residence, carefully documenting and collecting items. Though he was not arrested, Andrew, along with Holly and Willow, checked into a nearby hotel while the search commenced. The discoveries inside the home gave investigators reason to look closer. Multiple legally owned firearms were located inside the home, all of them properly registered. However, none matched the specific type believed to have been used in the attack. That said, a firearm suppressor, or silencer, was found that did not correspond to any of the registered weapons. In the garage, they uncovered a sheath for a large hunting knife. Although it couldn't be conclusively tied to the weapon used, its presence raised serious questions. The most potentially incriminating find came from Andrew's personal computer. During a forensic analysis of digital evidence collected from Andrew Beard's personal computer and electronic devices, detectives made a chilling discovery that corroborated Alyssa's earlier fears and suspicions. Installed on his systems were sophisticated spyware programs, high-grade surveillance tools typically used in corporate espionage. These applications were capable of silently intercepting phone calls, reading text messages, and recording Alyssa's private conversations without detection. Another program monitored GPS data in real time, allowing someone with access to her phone to track her location at any given moment. The situation became even more alarming when a detailed technical breakdown revealed that Alyssa's car had been equipped with a covert GPS tracking device. It had been expertly installed in a concealed area under the vehicle, giving Andrew constant access to her whereabouts without her ever knowing. The digital footprint left behind was clear. He had known exactly where she was going, who she was meeting, and when she was alone. Investigators concluded that this level of coordination could only be achieved by someone with obsessive intent and significant resources. The digital trail didn't stop there. Further investigation uncovered a previously hidden connection between Andrew Beard and Frank Marrow, the same man who had made the false police report accusing Alyssa of illegal activity just weeks prior. Evidence showed that Andrew had provided Marrow with specific instructions, a duplicate keyless entry device, and a financial incentive to carry out a carefully staged operation. Bank statements revealed a large, unexplained withdrawal from Andrew's account days before the incident. The money was traced to Marrow through a series of digital transfers. In essence, Andrew had attempted to orchestrate a framing operation, hoping that a criminal charge would strip Alyssa of custody and hand him full parental control of Willow. With these revelations, authorities finally had enough to take legal action. While there still wasn't direct evidence tying Andrew to Alyssa's murder, the charges related to illegal surveillance, stalking, and conspiracy to commit custodial interference were strong enough to warrant his arrest. On those grounds, Andrew Beard was taken into custody. However, due to the nature of the charges and lack of concrete evidence linking him to the more serious crime, he was released on bail the following day under strict conditions. A travel restriction order was imposed, forbidding him from leaving the state, and he was required to check in regularly with law enforcement. Despite this, Andrew returned to the home he shared with Holly Elkins and Willow, continuing life almost as if nothing had changed. But the case was far from over. On October 4th, a breakthrough came. A black SUV matching the description given by witnesses, the same vehicle used during the attack, was discovered abandoned in a remote wooded area miles outside the city limits. The vehicle, a Ford Expedition, had been thoroughly wiped down, but forensic investigators quickly found what they needed. The VIN number confirmed it had been rented a day before the murder under a fabricated identity using high-quality forged documents. Inside the SUV, the forensics team found more than just Alyssa's DNA traces. A bottle of dark-toned foundation makeup was discovered in the back seat, along with a synthetic black beard that appeared to have been hastily discarded. The false beard had visible makeup smudges and adhesive residue. When the beard was sent for analysis, DNA testing delivered a decisive result. It matched Andrew Beard. The disguise had been used in the commission of the crime, and it tied him directly to the scene. The evidence was now overwhelming. On the strength of this discovery, Andrew was rearrested and charged with first-degree murder. The same day, emergency legal action was taken to transfer custody of Willow to Alyssa's parents, who had petitioned the court after learning of Andrew's arrest. A temporary protective custody order was granted, ensuring Willow's safety while the legal system determined her long-term placement. The reaction among Andrew's circle was one of disbelief. To many who knew him casually, he was seen as a successful businessman and a doting father. He had no known history of violent behavior. But as details of the case emerged, friends and even family members began to reflect on subtle signs. Episodes of possessiveness. Some who had once defended Andrew began to reconsider what they truly knew about him. Even his own mother admitted in an emotional interview that she had noticed his obsession with gaining sole custody of Willow had crossed a concerning line. Holly Elkins, Andrew's fiancée, publicly expressed disbelief in the charges. She insisted that Andrew was innocent and stood by him during the early phase of the investigation. When questioned by detectives, she denied having any involvement in the murder, refused to testify against Andrew, and stated she would not cooperate with the prosecution. With no direct evidence linking her to the crime, Holly was released from custody and placed under observation, though she remained a person of interest. As the case moved forward, Andrew maintained his innocence. He offered an alibi for the morning of the attack, but under scrutiny, his timeline fell apart. Surveillance footage contradicted his claims, and phone records suggested he was near the scene at the time of the crime. With mounting evidence and the likelihood of a lengthy trial looming, Andrew's legal options grew narrower by the day. Then, after spending nearly 19 months in county jail awaiting trial, Andrew unexpectedly requested another interview with investigators. This time, he came prepared to speak without legal counsel. In a calm but chilling confession, Andrew finally admitted to his role in the crime. He detailed his actions from the very beginning, walking investigators through the surveillance and the final act. But in a twist that shocked even seasoned detectives, Andrew claimed he had not acted alone. According to his confession, it was Holly who had masterminded the plan. He described Holly as intelligent, persuasive, and quietly manipulative. She had a way of blending charm with subtle control. While to the outside world she appeared warm and nurturing, Andrew painted a different picture. He alleged that Holly's inability to have children of her own had deeply affected her emotionally. Over time, she became fixated on Willow, seeing the child as her own. When she realized that Alyssa's presence threatened that fantasy, Andrew claimed she began crafting a strategy. Holly allegedly aimed to have Alyssa declared unfit, using fabricated charges to have her imprisoned. However, there was another complication. Alyssa's parents, who could also petition for custody of their granddaughter. It was a calm afternoon when Andrew and Holly Elkins arrived at the home of Alyssa's parents to pick up Willow for a scheduled visitation. What should have been a routine exchange quickly spiraled into tension. According to witnesses, Holly appeared agitated even before entering the property, displaying signs of hostility and restlessness. As soon as the door opened, Holly reportedly began raising her voice, accusing Alyssa's parents of intentionally poisoning Willow against her and Andrew. Her tone, sharp and accusing, escalated the atmosphere from tense to volatile in a matter of moments. The situation turned confrontational, and within minutes, Holly accused Willow's grandparents of attacking her. Immediately after leaving the house, she called 911, claiming that she feared for her life. When law enforcement arrived, Holly appeared visibly shaken. However, After conducting initial interviews with all parties and examining the physical evidence, officers noted inconsistencies between Holly's account. Officers concluded that while an argument had clearly taken place, there was no evidence to suggest that Holly had been attacked or that she had been in any danger. The matter was formally documented, but no charges were filed. This event, however, wasn't an isolated incident. It was one more calculated move in a broader campaign orchestrated by Holly Elkins. Authorities would later learn that Holly had been the mastermind behind an earlier scheme to frame Alyssa. Her thinking was cold and strategic. If Alyssa were imprisoned, Andrew would automatically gain full custody of Willow. But when that plan collapsed due to a lack of evidence and Alyssa's name was cleared, Holly began exploring far more sinister options. As Andrew grew more influenced by Holly's psychological manipulation, she began crafting a detailed and elaborate plan. She reserved a rental vehicle using forged documents and a fake identity. She gathered materials, makeup, prosthetic disguise elements, and a synthetic beard to alter Andrew's appearance. She rehearsed the timing and logistics, covering every potential variable. The plan, in her mind, was perfect. She was convinced that the disguise, paired with Andrew's clean criminal record, would mislead investigators long enough to destroy any possible link between them and the crime. However, despite her meticulous planning, Andrew made critical errors. His inexperience with crime and his emotional volatility led to mistakes. Discarded items, overlooked surveillance footage, and forensic traces that quickly unraveled their carefully woven narrative. In May 2023, after nearly 3 years of legal back and forth and a grueling investigation, Andrew Beard stood before a judge and jury. Following his detailed confession, he was convicted of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 43 years in prison. Under Texas law, he would be required to serve a minimum of 30 years before becoming eligible for parole, a reality that would keep him behind bars for the majority of his life. Meanwhile, Holly Elkins made a strategic move. Just 2 weeks after Andrew's conviction, she quietly relocated to Michigan. She purchased a modest apartment in a small suburban town and began living under the radar. She refrained from using social media, kept a low profile, and cut off contact with almost everyone who knew about her past. For nearly 2 years, Holly lived in near anonymity, convinced that she had successfully distanced herself from the events in Texas and evaded prosecution. But Holly's sense of safety was short-lived. One quiet morning, as she prepared to leave her apartment, police officers appeared at her doorstep. Without drama or resistance, they placed her in handcuffs and informed her she was being taken into custody. Holly initially appeared calm, maintaining her innocence and claiming she had been a victim of Andrew's manipulation, not an accomplice. She asserted that she had no role in planning the crime and that her only mistake was remaining silent out of fear for her own safety. However, that version of events quickly fell apart when forensic experts presented digital evidence retrieved from her personal devices. Messages, voice notes, and encrypted emails between her and Andrew showed not only her awareness of the plan, but her active involvement in organizing it. In August 2024, Holly Elkins faced her own reckoning in court. The trial drew national attention. After several days of deliberation, the jury found her guilty on multiple charges: incitement to commit murder, conspiracy, aiding and destruction of evidence. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole,